In this video, we're going to talk about the idea of constructors and how they work into all of the things that we've been talking about with classes. So each class can provide a constructor, which is basically a template that can be used to initialize an object of a class when the object is created. So there are two different types of constructors. Right? We have the blank or empty type of constructor, which does not contain any arguments, doesn't require any input when we first create a class. Right? The second kind is the kind that's user defined. So with a user defined constructor, we may have arguments or values that we are wanting to pass into our class that go ahead and predefine some of the values inside of our public properties or that set other methods inside of the class so that once that object is first used in the code, we can guarantee that there will be values in those variables. So by default, you get a blank or empty constructor in every class, and the compiler just goes ahead and sets that up for you. It does not explicitly define it, but it does in fact exist in the background. So every class does have a constructor. The default constructor does not modify any default values inside of the class. So let's look at how to create a user-defined constructor that accepts values and then sets them into our public properties. Here we are in Visual Studio, and we've talked about what a constructor is, so we're going to look at how to define one. So we're in our report class, and generally a constructor will go near the top of the class. Since it is the blueprint or what we use to create an instance of this object, then it's easy to find if we put it near the top in case we ever need to go look at it. So a constructor is always public, and it's always named the same thing as the class. And the constructor should be designed like a method without a return type. All of the items or pieces of information that you need to collect in order to create an instance of this object is what needs to be defined as arguments of the constructor. So in this case, we have our two properties, name and date, and then we have type. We're going to set up our constructor to take in all three of these, just like we would in a method. Our constructor then sets each one of the incoming pieces of information to the property. And you can see here we have very similar names. These are just like arguments in a method. They can be named anything that you want. They don't have to match the name of the properties, but the data types do need to match since we are ultimately putting those values into the public properties. So what happens when we call the constructor is we'll have to pass all of the information that the constructor requires, and then it's going to set these public properties so that when we use an instance of the object, we can program with the assurance that all of those properties will be set and we could call those methods and that values will be available. So let's come over to our program in the main, and I've just set up three strings for our name, date, and type, and you can see that they just contain some static values. And here we're going to create an instance of the object. Now our object creation statement always looks the same regardless of what type of object we're creating. Anytime you want an instance of the object, it's the class name and then a name for your instance of the object, like a variable name, equals a new, in this case we use the new keyword to indicate that we are creating a new instance of the object, and then the class name. When we open the parenthesis, we can see Visual Studio's IntelliSense gives us some help on that constructor. And we have to provide these values in the correct data type and in the order that they're required, and it will bold each section as you move through. So name is what we provide first, and then you can see that it highlights or bolds date, and then type. So we have to pass all of the items to the constructor that are required by the constructor. And so if we run this program right now, then we can see we stop on the constructor, we have our name, our date, and our type. We come over to the public constructor of the report class, and each one of those values is set into the public property so that when we call these methods that we're going to create in our class, those values will be set. And like I said, we can program with the assurance that every time we have a report object, those three values will be set with something that has to be passed in at the time of object creation. So this object creation statement, like I said, it's very important that we remember the syntax, because anytime we're creating an instance of the object, this is the format. So class name, variable name equals a new class name, and then either an open and close parenthesis if we have a blank constructor, or all of our arguments have to be provided.